Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? Mason Porter wasn't running from something, at least not in the way he'd admit. The last 6 months had been a blur of burned-out deadlines, corporate stress, and a breakup that ended not with shouting, but with silence. So when he came across the blog post titled 10 Hidden Trails for Complete Isolation, he clicked instantly. One stood out. Unnamed Trail, outskirts of Boone Forest Preserve. The entry was short. No GPS path, no official park registry, a wooden sign, no name, no crowds. You'll find what you bring with you. It sounded like nonsense. Still, it stirred something in him. He packed light. Just a day pack, water, protein bars, compass, backup charger, flashlight, and a journal. The drive took nearly 6 hours into deep country. The final stretch wasn't even paved, just dust, gravel, and dense woods pressing in on both sides. He passed no other vehicles. Finally, he saw it. A small clearing opened at the base of a hillside, marked only by a weathered post buried deep in the dirt. Upon it, a warped, splintered wooden board. Someone had carved a single arrow into it with no words, just a rough slash pointing into the trees. There was no one around, no parking lot, no signs of recent use. Mason checked his phone, 1 bar. He sent a quick message to his friend, Josh. Starting a solo hike, Boone Side Trail. No name. I'll check in tonight. He strapped on his pack and stepped past the trailhead sign. At first, the trail felt normal, narrow but well-worn, enough to suggest past use. The forest was eerily quiet. Even the birds seemed distant. He chalked it up to natural silence. That's what he wanted, after all. Stillness. An hour in, Mason started to feel observed. Not watched exactly. More like the forest was responding to him. The trees felt too evenly spaced. The shadows under their trunks were too still. No wind moved through the leaves. Then came the oddities. He passed a small rock cairn. 6 smooth stones, stacked perfectly. Odd, but not unheard of. 20 minutes later, he saw another, and then another. Each identical. He paused at the third one. Something inside it glittered. Leaning closer, Mason saw a small, round mirror shard wedged between the stones. He plucked it out. His reflection stared back at him, warped slightly, almost stretched. He quickly stuffed it in his pocket. The trail behind him had become hard to see. I didn't turn, did I? He muttered aloud. This was a straight shot. The trees no longer felt evenly spaced. They pressed tighter, forming a slow spiral inward, like a funnel. He looked back toward the sign, but it wasn't there. Mason hadn't turned. He was sure of it. But somehow the trail had looped without him knowing. His phone had no bars now. 3 hours in, Mason began marking his steps with chalk. But when he looped around and passed the same cairn again, the chalk on the trees was gone. The mirrors in the rocks grew larger. Some had frames now, thin, rusted, as if pulled from discarded furniture. In one, he swore he saw movement, not his own reflection. Something in the background, slender, shifting past a tree just as he blinked. He spun around. Nothing. I'm just tired, he whispered. Tired and overthinking. He decided to turn back, but each step felt wrong, like walking through syrup. The air thickened. The trail narrowed unnaturally, the underbrush untouched by boots or animals. Mason found his own footprints, but they pointed the wrong direction, leading deeper in. He pulled out the mirror from his pocket. This time, the reflection didn't match. Behind him, in the mirror only, stood the silhouette of a man, tall, unmoving, featureless. He dropped the shard. It didn't shatter. It sank into the ground like it had never existed. Dusk approached quickly, too quickly. Mason's watch said 4:15 p.m., but the forest dimmed like early evening. He heard whispers, not words, more like dry leaves skittering across old wood. Then came the sign. Another wooden board. Same crude arrow. He blinked. This was a second trailhead, deep inside the woods. Except, he had started from a trailhead. There shouldn't be another. The board was rotting. Something had scratched into it over time. Besides the arrow, words, faint but legible. You've been walking in. You need to walk out. Don't listen to the trees. He stepped backward. The air grew colder. A rhythmic creaking sound began, like a rope under tension. No trees moved, but the sound persisted. Then above him, a shape, a figure, hanging in midair, swaying without a branch or rope. It turned slowly toward him. No face, just a black void where features should be. Mason ran. Branches clawed at him. Roots shifted beneath his feet. He didn't remember the ground sloping downward, but now he was descending, faster than he should have been able to, like something was helping him move, or pulling him deeper. He stumbled into a clearing he hadn't seen before. At the center was a mirror, 6 feet tall, embedded into the dirt like a grave marker. His reflection was still, not mimicking him, just standing still, arms at its sides. He circled it. The back was solid metal, bolted to the ground. Then, behind the mirror, he saw it again, the sign. But this time it was different. The arrow pointed backward now, and above it, carved deep and angry, "You're not alone. Never were." Following meant belonging. The wind began to howl, finally breaking the forest's silence. Leaves whipped around him in a violent circle. The mirror cracked, not shattered, just a fracture running through the reflection's eye. The reflection now moved, smiling. Its hand reached up and touched the inside of the glass. Mason stumbled back, heart pounding. The forest around him distorted, trees bending subtly toward the mirror, toward him. He ran, not back into the trail, but sideways, through the trees, uncaring if there was a path. Somehow, the woods thinned. The silence broke. Birds returned. The smell of damp soil filled his lungs. His feet hit gravel. He had reached the clearing again. The original trailhead sign stood in front of him, cracked but familiar. His car was still there. Sunlight beamed through the treetops as if the forest had never changed. Mason looked back once. No mirrors, no cairns, just woods. He didn't speak for the entire drive home. When he got to his apartment, his phone buzzed. One unread message, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. "Hey man, just checking in. Did you go hiking today?" From Josh. He looked in his pocket. The mirror shard was still there, now perfectly smooth, and it reflected nothing at all. Nina pressed the gas pedal a little harder, the wheels of her rental SUV kicking up dust on the winding desert road. The last cell tower had disappeared from her signal 30 minutes ago. No bars, no distractions, no calls from the hospital. Just the open Mojave stretching in every direction, sun-scorched and still. She was exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles deep in your bones, a slow, suffocating crawl. 7 double shifts in a trauma unit. Blood and screams and fluorescent lights humming like they were alive. People died. Some she couldn't save. Some she didn't even remember. Nina needed space to forget, or at least to stop shaking. The Airbnb listing had promised total seclusion. Off-grid, solar-powered, and miles from any paved road. The photos were almost too perfect. A weathered wooden cabin with a shaded porch, a hammock out front, and nothing but cracked earth and distant mountains for miles. Exactly what she needed. She reached the coordinates just as the sun began to dip, the horizon turning red and gold. The cabin stood like a mirage, small and square, with a rusted wind vane spinning lazily. No other houses, no power lines, no people. Perfect. The first night was blissful. Nina sat on the porch wrapped in a thin blanket, sipping lukewarm instant coffee, and staring up at a sky so vast It made her feel like a speck. No sirens, no buzz of machines, just the soft howl of wind and the creak of the wood beneath her. She fell asleep to silence, real silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. The second night, things changed. It started with a soft scraping sound outside the window, like sand dragging slowly across glass. She sat up in bed, heart fluttering. Probably just wind, she told herself. This was the desert, after all. Then came a faint thump on the porch, measured, rhythmic, as if someone was walking slowly, but only taking one step every few seconds. She held her breath, frozen in place, eyes glued to the cabin door. Another thump. She grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand, slipped on her boots, and crept to the front door. She paused, heart pounding in her ears, and threw it open. Nothing. The porch was empty, but in the sand just beyond it were symbols. 4 perfect circles carved into the dirt, each one larger than the last, all pointing toward the cabin. Not footprints, not tire tracks, symbols. She didn't sleep that night. By the third day, the solar battery was acting strange. It had been full when she arrived. The host had said it could last for 3 cloudy days without a problem, but now the charge monitor blinked red. 0%. No lights, no fridge, no water pump. It hadn't even been cloudy. Nina walked outside to check the panels and froze. The symbols were back. Different now. Instead of circles, there were spirals, tight, dizzying shapes carved deep into the earth, like someone had used their fingernails. They were closer to the cabin. She ran her hand through her hair, trying to breathe. "There's no one out here," she whispered to herself. "You're tired. It's stress. It's just stress." But that night, it got worse. She sat inside with her flashlight clutched like a weapon, every shadow a threat. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. Her breath came out in white puffs. And then came the voices. Whispers. Not loud, just loud enough to hear that they weren't hers. She moved to the window, shining her light across the empty land. Nothing, but the voices continued, just beyond the walls. Calm, like a conversation. No urgency, no anger. Just there. Then, a whisper that stood out from the rest. "She's still inside." Nina didn't move the rest of the night. In the morning, the wind was gone. The world felt static, frozen in a snapshot of heat and silence. Nina ventured out, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing moved, not even birds. She found her boots half buried near the edge of the porch. She hadn't left them there. Then she saw something else. A handprint in the sand. Not deep, but long. Fingers stretched unnaturally, too thin, too even, like a child's hand that had grown wrong. She packed her things in a panic. She couldn't drive out that night, but she'd leave at dawn. Her last act before sundown was to hang a line of old cooking pots outside, like makeshift alarms. If anything moved near her, she'd hear it. As night fell, the cabin seemed to shrink around her. The sky pressed down, stars cold and uncaring. Just after midnight, the pots began to rattle. Not crash, not fall, rattle, lightly, like someone brushing past them again and again. Then silence. Then the whisper returned, now directly behind the wall where her bed was. "We see you now." She couldn't wait for dawn. Nina bolted before sunrise, throwing her backpack over one shoulder and heading for the road. She didn't care about the rental deposit or the equipment she left behind. She just wanted out. But the trail markers she followed coming in were gone. The boulders looked different. Even the cactus formations had shifted. Or maybe she'd never noticed how wrong their shapes were until now. After an hour of hiking, she saw a figure up ahead. A man, standing perfectly still near a rock outcropping. She slowed, hopeful and cautious. "Hey, do you know the way back to the road?" she called. He didn't respond. As she got closer, she saw his clothes were tattered, sun-bleached and old-fashioned. Canvas pants, wide suspenders, a button-up shirt stained dark across the chest. Then he turned. His face was smooth, too smooth. His skin looked painted on, like wax with no pores, and where his eyes should have been, there were only blank, gray hollows, not sunken, flat, like someone had forgotten to carve them. His mouth didn't open the normal way. It peeled sideways, like paper folding, before stretching into a too-wide smile. Nina screamed and ran. She ran until her lungs gave out, feet bleeding in her boots. The landscape blurred into sameness, heat and dust and dead silence. Then she saw it, a strip of faded orange surveyor's tape tied to a bush, then another, and another. She didn't think. She followed it. The trail dipped into a shallow wash, twisted through rocky ledges, and finally, she heard a sound that didn't belong. An engine. A blue pickup truck rumbled into view, sun glinting off the windshield. She burst from the trail, waving both arms, nearly collapsing in front of it. The driver, a middle-aged man with tanned skin and weathered eyes, leaned out. "You coming off the ridge?" he asked. She could barely nod. "I don't know what's up there," she gasped. "I got lost." Turned around. The man stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, almost too softly, "No one goes out that way, not even the animals." The ride back to the nearest town was silent. Nina sat in the passenger seat of the old truck, hands trembling in her lap, eyes locked on the road. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see if something was following. The man didn't speak again. Not until the dusty outline of a diner appeared ahead, surrounded by 2 gas pumps and a faded motel sign. "You call someone if you need to," he said, pulling into the lot. "But don't go talking about things you think you saw. Folks around here don't ask questions for a reason." Nina stepped out without replying. Her legs were stiff, her body screaming for rest. The man didn't wait. He turned the truck around and drove back the way he came, back toward the ridge. She rented a room at the motel. It was musty and old, but it had running water and working lights. Luxuries she hadn't realized she'd missed so much. She stood under the shower for almost an hour, scrubbing the sand from her skin until it was raw. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's smooth, eyeless face, heard that voice behind the cabin wall. "We see you now." She checked the window 4 times, locked the door twice, left the light on. Around 2 a.m., the floorboards creaked. Just once. She sat up fast, breath caught in her throat. Nothing moved. The TV static buzzed faintly. She pressed her palm to her chest. Her heart was racing again. The next morning, Nina tried to get a cell signal. Nothing. The motel manager, a heavy-set woman in a trucker hat, shrugged when Nina asked about the outage. "Happens now and then," she said. "Storm must have knocked the tower. Give it a day or two." Nina didn't have a day or two. She used the motel phone to call a friend. Voicemail. She left a message but didn't mention the cabin, or the man, or the whispers. She didn't know what to say. It all sounded insane when spoken aloud. As she returned to her room, something caught her eye, carved into the paint of her door. A spiral, tight and clean, like it had been etched with a razor. Her breath hitched. She rushed inside, locking the door behind her. The air felt wrong again, thick and quiet, like she was back in the desert. She looked around the room. There was sand on the floor. Nina left before sunrise. She didn't pack. She didn't wait for the front desk to open. She threw on clothes, grabbed her keys, and left her bag behind. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just in that cabin. She drove for hours, heading north, away from the desert, away from the ridge. It wasn't until she reached a city, real buildings, noise, people, that she let herself breathe. She checked into a busy hotel downtown, 8th floor, secure. That night, she slept for the first time in days. But the dreams came. In them, she was back in the sand. The symbols surrounded her. The whispering came from inside her ears. And that man with no eyes stood at the foot of her bed, mouth opening sideways, stretching wider and wider until it split his face in half. She woke up screaming. 3 days later, her phone signal returned. She scrolled through photos from the trip, images of the empty road, the cabin, the firewood, her hammock. But in one of them, something was off. It was a picture she didn't remember taking. The cabin porch, taken from a distance at night, and standing near the door was the figure, the eyeless man. His body blurred slightly, but his face was perfectly clear, smooth, blank. Looking directly into the camera, Nina dropped the phone. She hadn't taken that picture. Weeks passed. Nina never went back to work. She tried to tell herself it was a hallucination, sleep deprivation, trauma. But deep down, she knew better. The spiral patterns began to appear in other places, in condensation on windows, in the steam on her mirror. One even formed in spilled coffee. Each time, closer. She moved apartments, changed her number, switched cities. It didn't help. One night she came home and found a pile of desert sand beneath her front door. Just a small pile, like someone had emptied their boots. That night, she heard the voice again, clear and quiet, just outside the bedroom window. "You're still inside." Nina eventually found an online forum, a buried thread full of people who'd been to off-grid cabins, desert trailers, abandoned ranger stations. People who described the same cold air, the same whispers, the same spirals in the dirt. One user had posted a sketch of the man. No eyes, wide smile, canvas pants. They called him the Watcher of the Ridge. Someone asked, "How do you stop him?" The only reply was chilling. "You don't. You left his place. But he's still in yours now." Mason didn't want to go to Briar Hollow. 12-year-olds weren't built for silence, trees, and no Wi-Fi. But that's exactly what his parents had promised. A total reset, fresh air, and a peaceful weekend. The kind of words adults used when they were trying to pretend they weren't already bored. His Aunt Lydia had recently inherited an old farmhouse near the edge of an abandoned state park. The place sat just outside Briar Hollow, a name Mason thought sounded more like a haunted fairy tale than a town. Still, the decision had been made. The family car was packed with snacks, flannel blankets, and too many bug sprays. They hit the road on a foggy Friday morning. The deeper they went, the narrower the roads became. Asphalt gave way to gravel. GPS lost signal. Trees crowded in on either side of the car like sentinels. When they finally pulled up, the farmhouse looked like it had been pulled straight out of a forgotten photograph. Peeling paint, lopsided porch, and a weather vane that hadn't turned in years. Aunt Lydia met them at the door. "It's a little dusty," she warned, "but you'll love the quiet, especially you boys." Riley was already inside. Mason's older cousin, 14 and reckless, was exploring the upstairs with a flashlight, acting like it was a treasure hunt. "You'll like it here," Riley said later that night. "There's a trail in the woods, overgrown, but I found it yesterday. Locals say it loops back toward the ridge. Supposed to be off limits now. Want to go tomorrow?" Mason hesitated. "Is it safe?" Riley just smirked. "Probably not." They left just after breakfast, canteens slung over shoulders, granola bars stuffed into coat pockets. The trail began just beyond a broken fence, swallowed by brambles and moss-covered stones. Trees bent toward the path like they were eavesdropping. No signs, no markings, just nature, old and untouched. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels. Just wind brushing against dead leaves and their footsteps. Riley led the way with his flashlight, even though it was morning. "Used to be hikers out here all the time," he said. "Back in the 90s. Then one summer, 5 people went missing. Shut the whole trail down." "Missing how?" Mason asked. "Just gone. No gear left behind, no calls. Nothing. Some people say it was an old mine shaft. Others say something else." Mason kept glancing behind them. The forest felt thick like it was pressing in. Then he saw something that made him stop. A boy, about his age, thin, dirty, standing barefoot between 2 trees, arms limp at his sides, head tilted. His eyes were too wide. "Riley," Mason whispered. "Do you see that?" "See what?" Mason pointed. But the boy was gone. The trees stood still. "Nothing," Mason mumbled, throat dry. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that sound. Tap, 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 soft and steady, coming from the second-floor window. There were no trees close enough, no branches, just the glass, and the night beyond it. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Eventually the sound stopped. The next morning, he didn't say anything. At breakfast, Aunt Lydia was chatting cheerfully about the town's tiny general store. His mom was humming while making pancakes. It was as if the forest hadn't breathed something cold and invisible into his room the night before. Later that afternoon, while Riley played with a pocket knife on the porch, Mason went exploring again, alone this time. He followed the trail just a little further than they had the day before, into the part where the trees grew so tight you had to sidestep between them. And then he saw the shoes, old, tattered sneakers hanging by their laces from a branch. Above them, 3 more pairs, all different sizes, all hanging like forgotten offerings. Mason slowly backed away. That's when he heard the voice. "You shouldn't be here." He turned sharply. A woman was standing just off the trail, hidden partly by the underbrush. Her face was pale and sunken, her hair a tangled mess. "Are you lost?" Mason asked. She didn't answer. She stared at him like someone trying to remember what a person was. Her lips parted like she wanted to say more, but then she turned and walked into the woods. Mason didn't follow. That evening, Mason told Riley everything: the boy, the woman, the shoes. For once, Riley looked serious. "You're not crazy," he said. "I think something weird's going on out here." He held up a Polaroid photo he'd found in a drawer in Aunt Lydia's hallway. The photo showed the front of the house years ago, fresher paint, shorter trees, but something else caught Mason's eye. There were shoes hanging in the trees in the background. The same tree, the same shoes. "That's from, 20 years ago," Mason whispered. The next day, they returned to the trail together. They walked deeper this time, far past the shoes, into the thickest part of the forest. Eventually, they came upon it. A building, rotting and half buried in ivy. The roof was slanted. The door hung crooked. A rusted sign above the entryway read, "Ranger Station 12. They stepped inside. It was cold. Dust danced in beams of light through broken windows. On one wall, faded posters hung in plastic frames. Missing persons. Dozens of them. Names, ages, descriptions, some yellowed with age. Mason stared at one near the center. It was Riley. Same face, same eyes. Dated August 1993. "That's not funny," Mason said. "Someone's playing a joke." Riley's hands were trembling. "I don't remember this. I was born in 2010. What is this?" Mason turned to the wall again. Another photo had been added recently. No dust on it. Fresh paper. It was Mason. They ran. Out of the station. Down the trail. Branches clawing at their jackets. The forest groaned around them. The air heavier with every step. When they burst out into the yard of the farmhouse, Aunt Lydia was standing on the porch. "I told you to stay out of the woods," she said, not looking surprised. "It's not kind to visitors." Mason stepped forward. "What do you mean? What's happening here?" She looked tired then. Her face softened in a way that almost made her look sad. "This house was left to me by my sister," she said. "She disappeared when I was a girl. Right here, in those woods. My parents searched for weeks, then stopped, then forgot." "Forgot?" Riley echoed. Lydia nodded. "The hollow makes you forget. It steals memories first, then names, then everything else." "But why are we still here?" Mason asked. "You're not. Not fully. Not anymore." Behind them, the forest loomed darker than before. No wind, no sound, just the presence, watching. "I'm sorry," Lydia whispered. "I should have never brought you here." That night, they packed in silence. Lydia didn't stop them. Their parents, oddly, seemed less disturbed than expected. like their memories of the weekend were already slipping, becoming soft, unfocused. Mason sat in the back seat, watching the tree line through the window as they drove away. The farther they got, the more the tension left his chest, but something stayed. He looked down at his coat. There was a pine needle stuck to the zipper, long and blackened, and faintly, in the distance behind them, he could still hear footsteps. Not rushing, just walking, steady, following. 2 months later, Mason woke up from a nightmare. He couldn't remember what it was about, just shadows and whispering. At school, he tried to tell a friend about the trip, but the details felt fuzzy. What town was it? What trail? What house? He couldn't remember the name Briar Hollow at all. That night, while brushing his teeth, he glanced out his second-story bathroom window and saw a barefoot boy staring up at him from the edge of the trees.